Here we go. I'm gonna have, we have the slides, and then I also have like a million and one parts and pieces that I'm gonna show you hands-on here, which usually I bring for you all to touch and play with when I do this in person. Not possible right now. Okay. And again, my contact information is kate.lee@dc.gov. That's the best way to reach me. DC Greens is also a wonderful organization doing a lot of good food justice work. I enjoyed working there for many years. Okay, so, you know, there's lots of different types of ways you can put water on your garden. You can just hand water, right, with a hose. Turn on the spigot, wave your hose around. You can use sprinklers so you don't have to stand in the garden and water everything. And you can use soaker hoses, which are somewhere right between a hose and a sprinkler, kind of. And each have their pros and cons, right? Sprinklers are great because you can walk away from them. Same with soaker hoses. Sprinklers get pretty good coverage, although, and they're very cheap, although they get a lot of water on the leaves of the plant, which isn't always somewhere, well, plants can't take up water there, and it can often lead to a lot of fungus and disease problems if you're getting too much water on your plants. You also lose a lot of water to like wind and things, so it's not really efficient environmentally, resource-wise. Soaker hoses are cool, and they're kind of like drip irrigation in a way, except one of the main downsides of a soaker hose is that they aren't pressurized. So that means that the portion of the soaker hose that's closest to the spigot is going to have like more water coming out of it, let's say, and it's less likely to have the same amount of water coming out at the end of the hose that's the furthest. Again, you know, probably a pretty affordable option, but it's not, they aren't my favorite. The reason I love drip irrigation is that you can really design them to be really hands off. And like my systems are totally automated with timers. So you don't have to ever turn on a faucet or off, or except that, you know, twice a season. And they're pressurized systems, which means that the exact same, if designed correctly, the exact same amount of water will come out of every single hole, every single drip hole, or every single little emitter. And we'll talk about what I mean by designed correctly, because there's a few things to note. Oops. How do we? Oh, there we go. Oh, so, and I guess lastly, as I put drip systems, if designed well, they can be really like a little more aesthetically pleasing, I think. Let's put it that way. I'm getting messages that said my internet is unstable, so I'm sorry if it's spotty. Okay, so there's some basic things to know, like generally, before you even start considering anything. And these will help you with plumbing in general also, but especially as you design your system, because there are a few technical things that are really critical in order to being successful. And one of the first things to know, this is really like language that'll also help you communicate if you're going to the store because you need a certain part, or if you're calling the drip irrigation supply center to get advice, or if you're reading the catalog. So male versus female, okay? And this is like, you know, designed in the way that we might anatomically associate the connector parts, okay? So this is a male part, where's we, right? This is the male part of the hose end, and this is the female part of the hose end. The idea being that the male part is inserted in the female part, right? And that's how they assemble. And we'll see that happening at different parts of the system, right? So you'll need these interactions of the system. So that's pipe thread the same way. Your hose a wider thread than like your piping will be. And you can see it on this white portion here on the bottom left. The left-hand side, the threads aren't wound as tightly as the right-hand side. And where this is relevant is that, like, yes, your pipe, your hose, excuse me, is gonna go, screw right onto this hose end side. But I design a lot of my systems, especially in farm sites or larger sites, or maybe through a backyard where your garden might not be right next to your spigot, and you need to transport the water, say like 15 feet across your backyard. I tend to use a network of PVC that I'll bury underground, so that then it's not a tripping hazard or a mowing hazard or anything, but that PVC is a pipe and a pipe thread. And so then you need to figure out how to make those systems compatible. And it usually involves like an adapter like you see on the bottom left, or like the one I have here in my hand. The other part that I'll show you is coming up again in a minute when it comes to pressure regulators. It's really weird because this is one part. Well, these are more industrial type uses. So these are pipe thread, which then you need, to connect to your filter, which is hose thread. Again, you got to start getting the adapters to all of this. So male versus female, pipe thread versus hose thread. And then if you're looking at a catalog, it'll often tell you, because you have to order, like all of these different parts and all of these different connectors. And so you'll be looking at a part, say you're looking at the filter in the catalog, and you'll see FPT, MPT. So female pipe thread, male pipe thread, female hose thread, male hose thread. And I mention that just because it's going to come up and it might be confusing. Sidebar, I have 2 cats. One's a kitten. They might make appearances here. It's playtime. Okay. So this is generally how I like to design my systems at the, closest to the spigot end. And I will say, going back to the pros and the cons, one of the downsides of a drip irrigation system is that it does tend to have larger startup costs, right, than a hose or a sprinkler. However, it lasts a number of years. It is largely plastic, another downside, but it'll last anywhere from 3 to 7 years if designed properly and cared for properly. You'll have to make certain repairs to it, but generally speaking, these parts are designed to last. So it is an upfront cost, but one that dissipates over time. So typically, let's see, what's the next slide? Okay, so this slide will come back up, but here are just to give you an idea about some of the language that we're talking about. You've got the valve, which is at your spigot, got a backflow preventer, which may or may not be relevant to you. If your spigot is above ground level, you don't tend to need a backflow preventer. Backflow preventers are designed to make sure that as soon as water goes past, outside of your system, into these other parts, that if there's a pressure drop, the water doesn't get sucked back in the building, right? Because there's no accounting for potential pollutants or dirt that may get back in and then enter your water line. So a backflow preventer makes sure that water only moves one way in the system. Pressure regulator, filter, adapter, like we were just talking about, and then tubing. These are the larger parts. of your system. After that, everything becomes like tinier parts, more flexible parts. So we'll get to that in a minute. I'm gonna take a sip of water. What I like to do is make sure that everybody starts their system, encourage at your spigot to, first thing you should get is a Y adapter, right? Because when you put your drip irrigation system on, you can see there they have a timer. Theoretically, that's gonna be there the whole gardening season, right? But you're likely maybe still gonna wanna just fill a watering can or wash your dog with the hose. And so if you have one of these, you can still access water at any time from your other line while not disrupting the setup that you've done for your irrigation system. Now, this is a brass fitting. You can usually find these in plastic as well if your budget allows it. I tend to encourage brass fittings. They just have better longevity. They're not without their complications. Like sometimes they get jammed, and if the metal gets stuck to the metal of your spigot, it can get harder to undo. But I still prefer brass if the budget can afford it. Let's see. Okay, and then I'm gonna go back here real quick. What you can see here too, well, let me see. Okay, that's fine. So as we were looking, this sign has a pressure regulator, filter, and then adapters. So you get your Y splitter here, and you've also got your timer. You've got, I love these timers, Orbit timers. This is the single zone timer. It has only one exit coming out of the bottom. Some have two, so that you can have two garden beds and you want to water them not concurrently. You might get one with two zones apart from it, and then you can set two different running times. Or maybe your water pressure isn't great and you can't run both beds both at the same time, and you need to run them time and time again. So there's that. Okay, other essential parts. This is a pressure regulator. There are different types of pressure regulators. This is another one. And what you have to do is a little bit of research here when you're looking at your system, because there is, a system definitely needs a minimum amount of water pressure in order to get the water through the tube and out the hole. But if it has too much water pressure, the pressure is going to build up in the line and it's going to burst your line, burst your parts, that kind of a thing. And so you want to read about what type, there's different pressure regulators that can set to different parts, different pressures. There's some making sure you get those coordinated. So the emits down to 10 psi, pounds per square inch, and this emits down to 30 per square inch. And different tubing can tolerate different pressures. That's why it'll tell you in the catalog. Now, this is a smaller, more affordable pressure regulator, but however, it is not adaptable to constant pressure, whereas this one is. And what that means is that if I have my spigot, right, I can, with the right adapters, connect this, turn my faucet on, open this up, and leave it open for the entire season, because the power barrier in here can withstand the constant pressure of the highly pressurized water that's coming out of your house, which is likely way more than 30 psi, okay? However, this one is not designed to work under constant pressure, so the valve in here, it would blow a gasket and have to be replaced. So if you can afford it, I tend to just encourage you to go to a constant pressure valve. The other part that you must need, that is required is a filter, okay? Because believe it or not, there's itty bitty teeny tiny particles in your water that you can't see that could build up over time and clog the itty bitty teeny tiny holes that are in your drip irrigation system. So you want to filter your water. And what this looks like is it opens up, and inside is a screen. These screens are replaceable. Sorry, I washed all this yesterday and it's still wet. This is a plastic mesh screen. They come in metal as well. And they go like 155 micron mesh, up to 200 micron mesh. I think those are the two options. And so like the water comes in the filter, goes through the filter, then the filter catches the water, but the clean water passes through and would come out this other end of the thing, of the filter. You're gonna wanna every now and then empty out your filter, flush your filter, which is what this little part is for in the bottom. So you would just let the water pressure, you would open it, flush it out just with the regular water pressure, and then close it. Another option would be just to open it up like I showed you earlier and just rinse out the filter. But so pressure regulator, filter required. Where am I going next? Okay, we'll get to timers. One thing that I'll point out here is that you'll notice that like these pieces are all in line, right? And they're all very solid pieces of plastic, right? So it's very rigid. Which is actually, to me, seems like a recipe for disaster. If you have this sticking out, because like figure with these pieces here, that's like 18 inches or something, sticking like straight out from the wall of your spigot, and that's pretty annoying. For me personally, and also seems like a recipe for disaster that something will hit it and it'll break, and these parts are the most expensive like single parts of your system. So what I like to encourage people to do, can you see my mouse? Can you all see my mouse? Can someone chat if you can? Okay, thanks Megan and Alana. Okay, so what I like to do is right here, actually insert a short piece of hose. And so these, they have like hose repair kits that you can buy, which are actually, they usually are like this female part, this male part, and this female part. So you can just cut a length of hose, say like 3 feet or something, and then just make a short 3 feet piece of hose. You can probably buy a short piece of hose also, and put it right here so that then this part can lay on the ground, or you can put it flush up against the wall or something, and it prevents you, it makes it a little more, not only aesthetically pleasing, but to me functional, not to have this rigid row sticking right off the wall. So that's just something to keep in mind, is insert a short piece of hose there. I talked about the timers. What I didn't mention is that there's manual versus electronic. So this is electronic one. You put a battery in it, and it's gonna run, you know, probably all season. You'll probably need to replace the batteries every season. And the timer is the one part that you're gonna wanna disconnect at the end of the season and bring inside, because the electronic stuff isn't gonna wanna freeze all summer long. We'll talk about winterizing in a bit. And this is cool because it's just like you set the time, and then you set when you want it to run, how many days a week you want it to run, how many times a day you want it to run, and for how long. Like, I love these timers. Orbit, made by Orbit, O-R-B-I-T. There is also a really cool feature on here for a rain delay, which is like, you know, say your timer is set to water every day, but a day like today, it's going to rain all day. So you probably don't need it to water your garden again until Saturday. You can come and hit one of these buttons and delay it for 24, 48, or 72 hours. So it won't pass water through. It won't turn on again until the end of that period, at which point it'll reset to whatever settings it was at before. I really love these. As you can see, this picture on the right also has what I was talking about earlier, the multiple zones. You can get timers up to 4 zones, so you can have 4 different areas all being watered at different times from a single hose line input. A manual timer tends to be more like like a kitchen egg timer. They're can be great, and in the right setting, I'm sure they're good, but they do require you to turn them on. They'll turn themselves off, and that's great, but you do have to manually turn them on. Something like this will turn itself on and off without you ever having to do anything. Megan is asking, so you put it between the valve and all the other components. It's not gonna matter per se. You can either, you can put it on either the spigot end. I would maybe actually say I did say by the spigot earlier, it might be better to put it after the pressure regulator so that the constant pressure going on the timer isn't the high pressure coming out of your wall. It was for the 3-piece component. Megan, I don't know if you're looking, the extra piece of hose is for everything. I would go the extra piece of hose, then either the filter or the pressure regulator, and then the timer. So is that answering your question, Megan? Great, she said yes. And I'm happy to share this presentation out when we're done. Okay, this is when we get to the fun part. Like, I feel like this part is like complicated Legos in a way. And there's some basics that you should know about the pieces. So this comes to just some language familiarity that we're gonna go through here. 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, and 5/8 inch, okay? All of your tubing is gonna measure one of those values, okay? And what that number represents is the diameter of the tubing, okay? So you have, this is 1/2 inch tubing, right? Diameter 1/2 inch. This is 1/4 inch tubing, diameter 1/4 inch, and 5/8, don't even worry about it. I'm not a math person. I can't do in uneven fractions. Unnecessary for your understanding. However, 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch are also going to come up when you get to your fittings, okay? Because obviously to connect 2 pieces of tubing this size is different than 2 pieces of tubing this size. So, you know, here's a 1/2 inch T, and here's a 1/4 inch little connector. So you've got to pay attention to be consistent, to make sure you order the right parts where you need what size. Back to the tubing. The tubing, each size tubing comes in either solid or with emitters. And what that means is, like, this is solid tubing, which is also known as mainline, which is really important for moving water to one place or another in an area where you don't want to emit any water, where you don't want any water to drip out. It is literally just a solid piece of tube with no holes in it. That same 1/2 inch tube comes in, and I don't know if you can, well, yeah, you can see it. So see right here, it gets a little bit bigger. There is a teeny little hole in there, and that's a place where water comes out. So this is a 1/2 inch line that emits water. Same works for 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch solid tubing, 1/4 inch line with emitter built in, right? So some of them are just for moving water one place to another. Some is for the areas where you want to drip the water out. The lines with emitters in them, you can get so that these emitters are different spaces. Typically, it's anywhere, this, the 1/4-inch tube comes with spacing that's either like 6 inches, 9 inches, 12 inches apart. And then the 1/2-inch tubing comes with spacing that's usually like 12-inch, 18-inch, or 24 inches apart. I tend typically, and in DC, a lot of us, I figure, are probably backyard gardeners. This isn't the 1/2-inch emitter line isn't something you're going to use much. It's just like more than you need. This 1/4-inch emitter line is going to suit all your needs just fine. And I would recommend the 9-inch spacing. That tends to be what I would use if I were building my garden irrigation system. Okay, coming back to all the things that are called fittings and couplings. So you have many, many different options like this that you'll see when you start digging around. And they have different names, right? So this is a T, right? It allows you to create a T inner space in your, it would connect here, and then you could have a line running off the bottom as well. You have, this is the piece that would allow you to go like from the end of your timer here to then connect to the tubing. I don't actually know what this piece is called. I think it's called a thread to mainline connector. I think that's what it's called. So you've just got different types of fittings, and then again, they come in 1/4-inch sizes too, right? So this is an L piece that's a 1/4-inch size. There's an L piece that's a 1/2-inch size. This is the 1/2-inch T. There's a 1/4-inch T as well. There are different ways that the fittings connect to each other that I think is worth introducing. The one I've been showing you so far is called an easy lock. And I tend to use this. Let's see, you would, this toggly part here spins. You would, in order to connect it, you want to spin it back all the way so that this nub is open as much as possible. And then you have to use a lot of muscles and jiggle it in really, really hard and tight until the tubing comes over. You can't see the end of the tubing, right? It's almost under this swivel part, and then you twist the swivel back over it, away from the middle, and that locks it in place. But it still allows you to take it off if you want to, right? You can just unscrew this and then awkwardly pull it apart, okay? These are called easy lock fittings. Personally, they have my endorsement, but you gotta figure out what works for you. Another connection is barbed fitting, okay? Where both of these sides are barbed, and they work by creating like, whatever pressure that when you pull the opposite direction of something, it creates tension and doesn't release. So I'm not gonna put it in here, but you can. Again, it's not permanent, but to me, it's just, I don't know. The other one is a little easier for me to use and get apart and move apart, which is why I like it. And it also gives you somewhere, it also can be slightly temporarier, the easy lock. The last one that I want to introduce you is a compression fitting. Basically what this is, it's hard to see in this light, I think, but basically it's a tinier hole in the center than it is slightly than the tubing. So the idea is that you would jam this tubing in here and you're compressing the tubing as it goes in, and then you can never, ever, ever, ever get it out. So I definitely don't use these because I like the flexibility of going back and changing it. See, oh, look, you can see there. There's tubing in there that I had to cut out from a different presentation. So I'm just introducing all of these terms to you all so you have the familiarity. But again, the easy lock are ones that I tend to use. This is only for the 1/2 inch, but it has my endorsement. Okay, everybody doing okay? How are we doing on time? All right, good. Let's see here. Punch tool, important, right here. And nowadays, there's a lot of different types of punch tools out there. I like this one. It's probably a little more, maybe a little more expensive. And again, I haven't been working with drip irrigation in a while, so there might be a few more modern tools. Actually, though, I'll be honest, I think they've gone cheaper recently, and I'll show you. But so this is a punch tool I like. It's got the little thing right here, and that pokes the hole in your tube, which is then how you connect a few lines, and I'll get to that in a minute. Here's another example of a punch tool. This requires a little more, what's it called when you have to use your own power more than using like machine power to poke a hole. Like I said, I think they've gone cheap now because this is like what you get when you order a kit. So I don't know if they've gotten smarter. They've definitely gotten cheaper. But basically, it looks something like this. You have your tool. Let's say you have your main line. You got to your garden bed, and you need to connect your 1/4 inch line because this 1/4 inch line has the emitters, and that's what you want to water your garden. You would take your tool, connect it here, and just squeeze. You might be able to hear it. Squeeze. I don't know if you could hear that. And then there's a hole now inside my tubing. And so then I'm gonna take, let's see, yeah, we'll get there. So then I'm gonna take one of my connectors, one of my couplers here, and I'm gonna put it in this, well, you know what I like to do is actually put it in the 1/4 inch first, and then stick it in the 1/2 inch, because then I have the whole leverage of this whole tube to hold on to. And again, because these have to be airtight, Cortez, I know, it is a little pop that's fun to hear. Because it does have to be an airtight system in order to stay pressurized and prevent leaks, you really do have to use, as my mother would say, like elbow grease in order to put these parts together. So expect your the tips of your fingers to hurt by the end of it. And you might have to push, push hard to connect these things sometimes. So just be ready for that. And then lastly, as I mentioned, PVC. I like to use PVC in the underground portions of my bed, rarely in the above ground portions, except we'll get to valves in a minute, except right when they come out of the ground. And a lot of this similar language and pieces are relevant to PVC. So PVC comes in 1/2 inches. PVC has fittings and couplers that are T's or that look like this, but are made of PVC. You would glue them together. The glue is certainly something that's terrible for the environment, and do not get it on your skin, but it is required for using PVC. So I will use it on occasion. Anyways, PVC, something to consider depending on the size and space of your garden. Okay, there's different types of emitters. I think this top right corner is meant to show you what drip tape looks like, or what drip line, emitter line is looking like when it's laying in your garden bed. The bottom 2 pictures are, one is probably just a dropper, and the other, these are designed, one to be the dropper, my intention of these pictures, and one is a sprayer. So, you know, just like those other half-inch, quarter-inch, just like these other quarter-inch little pieces, this is a dripper, has a little thing on it, and you would just, you know, insert it in like to the end of a line, say maybe on a hanging basket or something, or at the base of a tree, maybe. And it's gonna drip water, whereas the sprayer version of these is gonna spray water. Now, the catalog will tell you the rates per minute that water is emitted in terms of gallons. So it'll tell you that either, you know, like the yellow dropper is like 1 gallon per hour dropper, whereas the red dropper is 2 gallons per hour, kind of a thing. Sprayers tend to spray. That language is more about the diameter of the spray. So maybe like 1 foot, 2 foot. Some are only like half circle sprays, like a rainbow shape. Some are full circle sprays. And then same with drip tape, which is on the floor, or the emitter tubing will also tell you about how many like gallons per hour it's emitting like per hole, right? Okay. Back real quick. One cool thing I do like about this punch tool is that it has these extra features, one of which is this little doohickey part, which actually works really well as a tool to like pull your pieces out, because like there would be no way to just do this with your fingers. You can maybe do it with pliers, but it's designed to help you do that, even though you still have to struggle. The other part is the bottom end of this has this doohickey, which is meant to actually be ergonomic and help you. I did it by connecting it first to the 1/4 inch line, but you can do this and then put it in the hole this way. So another plug to splurge on this one. Okay, great. So now we'll get to layout. Any questions so far? I'd say we're maybe about halfway done here. Any questions about parts? Anything? No? Okay. So layout, goodness. What you see here, right, is a raised bed, wooden raised bed, and basically this is my ideal design that I will use in a raised bed, or that I'll use if I have a farm field that's like 30 feet by 120 feet, okay? It's the same general layout. Well, I mean, the parts might be the only thing, but it's, you've got the main line running across the right end of your screen, and then you have the emitter tubing running out down into the fields where your crops are. Again, like here's a really great example of like how a soaker hose won't emit water evenly, right? And like this end that's in the middle here, there's not going to be as much water coming out of it as this end right here. However, the great part about these systems, oh yeah, I did want to go back, is that this is like bendable tube. So you can still accomplish the same thing as in that other system. And even the smaller tube is, you know, it has a chance to build smaller diameters. You know, you can do like S shapes. It's got a lot of flexibility with it. I brought us back to the screen to demonstrate that the tubing, 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch, come in different lengths of rolls when you order them. So, you know, you're going to design this whole system on paper before you ever order anything. And you're going to make a shopping list of every 1/2 inch tee that you need, every 1/4 inch tee, and then you're going to do the calculations for how many linear feet of tubing you need. You can buy them in 50-foot rolls, 100-foot rolls, 500-foot rolls, and they'll come shipped like this. So just want to mention that. Same with the smaller ones. It doesn't come in as long, the feet aren't as long, but you buy them in tubes like that. So yeah, again, you know, back with the drippers, you could use, you know, you could use a main line to get all the way to your tree, and then you can make a circle around the base of your tree, or maybe you just like put a dropper at the end of your, at the end, and you put a dropper at your tree. You can, like you see here, zigzag your lines all over the bed. I don't tend to do that. I just put straight lines in, but it gives you flexibility. You know, maybe your crops didn't germinate the way you wanted them to, and so you need to move your line a little bit because they're all growing on one half of the bed or something. You have a lot of flexibility in the shape of your design with these parts. But again, this is what I come back to, although there is a flaw in this picture that I'll tell in a minute. But this is very much how I design my beds. The only thing I probably would not have done is put these out on the outside, okay? I find that to be unnecessary because these emitters in your lines, I'm gonna bend down real quick, 1 second. My cat knocked all the tubing down. The emitters in the lines emit water in what evolves as like a full circle pattern, the way the water like drips and spreads. And I might have a picture of it later, I'm not really sure. But so the flaw in this is that like this is wasting a lot of water, watering like the side of your bed. It's really inefficient, it's unnecessary. And so like basically you figure like, you know, by the time it waters that circle and that circle and that circle, like your plant that's planted here is going to have plenty of water. So my recommendation for calculation is like, say this is a 4-foot bed. If you have 4 feet beds, you only need 3 lines. Say you have a 5-foot bed, you only need 4 lines. So you need 1 line less than width of feet, and spread those lines equidistant. So use these 3 lines to build 4 sections, if that makes sense, right? 1, 2, 3, yeah. So that's that. Again, you can curve, if you have like, say you live up in Spring Valley and you have a really nice, huge yard with a bunch of perennial shrubs that are like 100 feet long, and you want to put in a drip system, at that point, you probably would think about the larger 1/2-inch system, which still gives you, or 1/2-inch tubing, excuse me, which still gives you flexibility, you know, it's still really bendable. And I will say, this is a good time for me to bring up that the one, maybe, the thing to keep in mind is, again, I use the 1/4-inch line, but it's probably good for any household garden in the city. I'm willing to wager larger farms is different, but any household garden, the 1/2-inch emitter line is probably all you need. However, it only stays pressurized to a certain length. What I mean is that like the 9-inch emitter spacing only works, it like guarantees pressurization like only up to lengths of 50 feet. So if you have 75 feet to irrigate, the 1/4-inch tube, 9 inches isn't going to be your thing because it can't guarantee that the same amount of water is going to get to that last foot. So that's something to look at and keep in mind. The 1/4-inch emitter tubing does have some limitations about the maximum length you can use it in to stay pressurized. Again, usually not an issue in home gardens, especially for the size of often what we're dealing with in DC, but something to keep in mind. So again, here's some good examples of PVC and items that have been trenched. when I'm designing my thing, like, you know, you want to think about sort of like the layout of it all, right? And what I do not like about this top picture is that it comes right up in the middle of the bed, and obviously one line down the middle, not helpful, okay? Because these plants, any plants along the side, but also it's like you would have to branch off like, full, in the other design that I like the line across the top, but you would have to branch off two ways, and then you would have an end of the tube here and an end of the tube here, and then that's two end caps pieces that you have to buy. Whereas if you come up on one side of the bed and then just run it across the top of the bed, that's only one end cap that you need. So just, these are like teeny little details that I think of over time. Again, this was probably more to talk about trenching or ways you really want to keep your tubing out of walkways. I do tend to, my systems are all connected and designed, and you're designed to be linked together, and yours will be too. Here's one example of it, but here's another example that I like better, and better exemplifies like the type of trenching I would do. So here in my designs, this would typically be PVC, although you can do it with mainline. And then you would just come up and out at every single bed. So this would be one of the T portions, right? And then here would be one of the elbow portions, and same up here, and then again running across here. Cortez, I see your question. I'll get that in a second. One thing I want to point out is right here, it's hard to see, but this is a valve. And typically, and valves you can either get at PVC or you can buy them from the place that sells these. They have them in this type of the system that works with this too. And I like to put one valve at the edge of every bed, right? Because maybe your beds aren't all planted at the time, or you're doing crop rotation, and like this is your spring bed and this is your summer bed, and so you might not need all your beds to run at the same time. If you put a valve at your bed, you can just shut the water off for that bed when you're not using it. Okay, we have a couple of questions. Cortez asks, do trenches need to be leveled? No, not like to a scientific like construction type of thing. Basically what's more important is that you try to get it a little deeper, right? Because it's, so you try to get like 3 to 6 inches deep to avoid impacts of soil freezing in the wintertime. The idea being that water is probably still in those lines, possibly, and when that water expands, it could crack your lines. So trying to get it deeper is probably the most important thing. But I don't, I mean, you're basically, I just use like a pickaxe to just like trench a line. It's not, again, I don't ever pull out a level. I eyeball it. That's all you need. And then these I was going to mention later, but they've come up in a few pictures and I'll mention now. These are called U-pins. Sod staples is another thing you could use, although I really like the U-pins because they're round on top, and all of our tubing is round. So what you don't see here that I would do in my system is trench this line and then put these over the tubing into the ground, which then is going to help keep your tubing as secure to the ground. But typically, I mean, don't make your trench like that, but you don't need to pull out a level or anything. Alexander's asking why PVC over mainline. I just I think that like if you were to necessarily like, this mainline I could cut with scissors, whereas the PVC I couldn't. So it's less, PVC is less damageable. So, oh shoot, my battery's low. Hold on. a little more sturdy. It's a little more heavy duty. And again, yeah, like if you ever want to do other groundwork, any other things, like I just find it might be harder to locate the main line later, because you could just like, if you put a shovel right through it possibly, whereas like, you know, if you're trying to locate a line of PVC and you're just like poking around with a shovel, you're gonna hit it and it'll make a noise and you'll know it's there. I just found myself to really like it. It's not necessary by any means. So yeah, great questions, everybody. So again, here's another example of series trenching where you can go under and come up inside the bed. I've done this before. It's over-designed in my opinion. I really am a huge fan of this pattern right here. You can see also like they put these are called, I believe, like C-clamps. And then so you can just like really bracket it to the side of the bed. Yeah, okay. This is mostly, again, I showed you this earlier. Sorry, these pictures are so grainy, but yeah, more about, this is like putting the little 1/4 inch connector into the line, that 1/4 inch line first, and then sticking it in the main line gives you a little more leverage than like trying to put your finger right around that teeny little nub. Oh, Jesus, sorry, y'all. And getting it in there. Valve placement. So this is a good to point out. So again, 1 valve per bed is plenty. You'll see this a lot when you go to farms, that they put a valve on every line. Again, totally over designed. Like the odds that like you'll only need to, I mean, again, this is way more lines than you need in a bed. I just say go 1 valve. Again, I mean, it's number of parts you have to order kind of a thing. Follow your heart, but this is over designed in my opinion. The only downside to this is that this valve, like I can totally see myself hitting my ankle on this valve, and that hurts just looking at it. So I like to have the valves up on the top part of the bed. You know, you're gonna hit that with a lawnmower, you're gonna hit that with a wheelbarrow, so not a great idea for there. Oh, well, here we go. This is a broken valve, but there, my ideal placement. There you go. U-pins we talked about. U-pins are great. They come in like 6-inch as well as 3-inch, like mini size. So, you know, good for 1/2-inch tubing, good for 1/4 inch tubing, kind of a thing. Talon clamps. So a C-clamp we talked about earlier in that other slide. These are called Talon clamps, and they're also really efficient. If you, again, this comes wound in a coil, so it's often wants to stay round when you pull it out, but a lot of times our gardens or our raised beds are straight. So you need to use a little bit of force to keep it straight, and a Talon clamp is a perfect way to do that. And then you would just take this nail and nail that into the top of your garden bed, and it would sit there nice and pretty. Or say that you have some hanging baskets and you want to use your 1/4 inch line to like run up the side of your porch pillar to get to your hanging basket, and you could use a little 1/4 inch Talon clamp to then like staple it to your pillar so won't be like wavy. It'll just sort of hide it a little better. This goes back, maybe I should move this slide into something earlier. Valve box, you would probably have to go to somewhere like Granger to get a valve box. You can't really open them at the drip supply store. But again, you know, all these pieces, here's your filter, here's your pressure regulator, here's your adapter. These are all just really ugly pieces of hard plastic that you may want to think about like hiding or camouflaging some way. So one option is to use a valve box to hide it in the ground, cover it up, kind of a thing. So something, again, a part I like to introduce. Factors to think about. These are mostly around like setting your timers, but also around like the layout of your system, right? Because certain soils drain faster than others. Certain crops need more water than others or more frequency. And that varies for site to site. So I don't have any hard and fast rules to tell you. But just as you're thinking about your line spacing, as you're thinking about your emitter spacing, and you know you have high clay soils that don't drain well, like maybe you don't need as many lines, or maybe you don't need your emitters as close. Like those types of questions are things to be thinking about. Sorry, the box cutter and the tubing clamps. We've sort of gone over. Box cutter is really helpful just to cut the tubing, although box cutters can be kind of dangerous. A pair of really good like heavy pruners, I find, or some good, like really good kitchen scissors, something pretty heavy duty, but there's nothing that's to cut through this. Like a pair of good kitchen scissors could cut through this. What I think I did forget to tell you about is channel locks, and they're in my truck, so I'm sorry. Channel locks are one of my most favorite tools in the entire world, and really so helpful in making really, really tight connections in irrigation, and then having the leverage to undo those tight connections without having to use all of your strength to do it. So I definitely encourage everyone to get a pair of channel locks. The other thing to talk about is Teflon tape. Okay, this is really crucial too for plumbing in general, especially irrigation systems. Again, it comes back to like every teeny airspace is a place for water to get out, so that creates leaks, and it impacts the pressurization of your system negatively. So this cool plastic tape, sorry, that's working, how's I'm getting. This is Teflon tape that's not actually sticky except to itself, which is really cool. And what you use it for is you wrap it around, and you want to go in the direction of your threading, okay? So you would put it on here and then pull it tight so that it fits into the creases, and then you just wrap it around in your creases. And basically it's like a little bit of cushion for then the female piece to grab onto, that's going to fill any possible open space between these two hard pieces of metal. It's like a miniature little sponge that fits in the cracks of these hard plastic, places. So Teflon tape, really worth the like $2.99 that you're going to spend on it. Okay, back to the timer. It's going to change per seasons. We've had a really rainy May. Typically, my irrigation systems would probably come on in May. That hasn't been really that necessary this May. It's been real rainy. And same in the fall. The days are starting to shorten. The temperatures are starting to cool. You don't need your system on, running, watering as much as you do in the high heat of summer. So these are my suggestions in the spring and fall. You want to run, probably every other day is more than enough. 30 minutes every other day is probably fine. Again, there's a variety of factors. You're going to have to pay attention to your crops, but that's a pretty good general rule of thumb. And 8:30 is a good time because when the temperatures are cooler and the days are shorter, you want to water after the sun has come up, okay? Now, that's different in the high heat of summertime, okay? In the high heat of summertime, it's really ineffective to water when the sun's up in its highest. Plants are really stressed in that environment. When the sun is out and it's so hot, plants actually lose a lot of their function to take up the water from the soil. So it's really inefficient to water then. So in the summertime, water before the sun comes up. Now, not at like 3 in the morning, right? Because they're not taking up water in the middle of the night anyways, but it's great to water right before the sun comes up, because then they can start using it right away when the temperatures are still a little bit comfortable. I find that in the summertime, I might have to water twice a day, especially if you're looking at container watering or container growing as well. So at that point, wait until the evening when you still have a few hours of daylight left, but it's not the high heat, high temperatures of the late afternoon. I get a lot of people who are like, can I put these systems, can I connect these systems to rain barrels or cisterns? And unfortunately, it's really hard to do. I wish it were easier because Raincatcher is awesome. But the way that these systems require a minimum pressure, water pressure, it's really hard to achieve with gravity. You would need to raise the water so high off of the ground that it's really unlikely that you could do so in a home system. There are some pumps that you can get, none of which are really that great. They have my endorsement. So I tend to say that like harvest your water, but you do need to use it for like hand watering and some other things, or just getting it back into the groundwater instead of the sewer system. And winterizing, let's see, how are we doing? I think we're almost done here, you guys. Winterizing is an important part of this system. I tend to turn my systems off, usually around October sometime. And like I said, you're going to want to bring the timer inside. This has electronic parts that won't appreciate freezing temperatures. Go ahead and take the batteries out, even just flip them over and put them back inside so it's not just like draining the power from the battery. But I also really encourage you to just go ahead and change the battery at the start of every year so that you don't run into a problem of your battery dying and you not realizing it for a couple of days in the next season. You want to do your best to try to drain the lines. Like I said, your lines are susceptible to cracking if water remains in those lines and it freezes and expands. So 2 strategies to do this are, one is like, my beds tend to have these end caps on them at the end of the lines. I like to open them up at the end of the beds. You can either like try to raise like the part that's nearest to the spigot, raise it up and use gravity to flush out remaining water. Another is to like blow into the line to put pressure on any remaining water to force it out of the system. And it's probably not like you have to get every drop out, but you want to get most of it out because water expands. But then what you want to do is like once you've disconnected your, like say you have like, you know, you've disconnected your timer, right? So now you have this end and this end that maybe you're gonna leave outside. You don't want a lot of bugs and dirt to get in these lines over the winter. So I just take a Ziploc baggie and like put it over the edge and tie it on with a rubber band. Same with the end of this. You wanna put plastic bags on there, wrap them up. It helps to keep like bugs and dirt out of there. And in the spring, when you're restarting the system, what you want to do before you put your ends back on fully, you want to open up again the system and run it, flush it out, clear the lines once. Whatever small debris or dirt or spiders may have gotten in there will run out before you close your system up for use. So I showed you a lot of parts today, and there are ways that you can buy kits that have multiple parts in it that you will use. However, you're probably going to need to buy additional parts. The reason I mention these kits, though, is that it's usually a pretty good deal. You know, odds are you need a filter, like I said. Odds are you need the main line, U-pins. Here's some good hose ends that are nice and simple. I didn't talk about those, but that's okay. Here's some connectors. Here's the punch tool. Like, and since it's all a packet, they give you like the better price. You're gonna have to look. These are 4 different examples of kits with different ingredients in them. You'll have to figure out what's best. You'll have to do the math to figure out if it's the right deal for you, but it's something to consider as a place to maybe get a number of parts that you will need at a little bit of a discount price. And then you can just add on and build on from there. DripWorks is the company I love to use. They're based in California. Drip Depot is based out of Oregon. And while they're great and their prices are perhaps a little bit cheaper, DripWorks has a more comprehensive selection of parts. And last time I talked, which granted has been a little while ago, but they have an incredible customer service team, like incredible, real people that answer the phone, that know the parts, that want to help you troubleshoot your system. Really, really helpful. The PVC stuff, you're going to get all at Home Depot. You're going to source that locally if you want it. Fraggers is another, but a lot of these things, like all of these little parts and the tubing, you're going to have to buy from a specialized store. You can't find this stuff at Home Depot. So you're going to want to go to DripWorks. Fraggers on the Hill has some of it, but not as comprehensive, and they typically only have the smaller parts. They don't tend to have a lot of the half-inch parts. Berry Hill Drip Irrigation is an East Coast-based company that I've heard of, never used, but you know, regional, so your environmental impact might be a little less. And I guess that's it. Yeah. Okay. That's a lot. It's really technical. And it does take, I really encourage you. DripWorks also had a really great catalog that's typically free if you ask for it. And they even have like a lot of best practices. It's almost like, in some ways, sort of like a choose your own adventure. They've got like lots of little comment bubbles in the margin that really help provide context to a lot of the parts. So I definitely, if you are really thinking about building one of these, I would call DripWorks and ask for one of their catalogs, and just start familiarizing yourself with the parts, that kind of a thing. To the extent that I'm available, I have a new job that's demanding a lot, but to the extent that I'm available, I'm happy to be a resource. I'm also like, if you've designed a system, like draw it out. That's what I do when I'm putting a system. I map out the entire thing, and then start drawing in like, oh, T connector here. Oh, end cap here. And then I can count better that way and see my system and the whole overview. To the best of my ability, I'm willing to like look at your drawings and give you feedback. Again, sorry about this. Contact information, my email is kate.lee@dc.gov. All right, it's weird because now everybody's silent, but any more questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I hope you and yours are managing well, given all of the circumstances, but growing your own food is, maybe more important than ever. So good luck and see you around. Okay? Thanks. Okay. Thank you for writing, everybody. Awesome. There you are. Oh, great. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, you too. Oh, hey, Rooting DC is this really amazing gardening conference every year, and I used to teach this workshop there every year. I don't know if they'll have Rooting DC next year, but you all should definitely. It's a free, all-day, amazing, like where this is like one example of the 75 different workshops that are available, and it's totally free and awesome. So keep an eye out. If you get Josh's newsletters, you'll hear about it, but that's usually in like February or March. And fingers crossed we'll be able to have it again. So, all right, I'm gonna stop sharing and I guess say goodbye. All right, bye. Thanks everybody. End meeting.